everyone, Heba here. Welcome to our channel. Today I have diverse topics to cover. I would like to create a 2-episode series on predominantly the fall of Atlantis, the distortions that took place, the misuse of energy, leading to something called frequency fence and genetic manipulation of human DNA. So I will be taking you on the journey through the hijacked ascension from the time of Atlantis, and what's occurring now is something super interesting and exciting. It is the great spiritual awakening and the reclamation of the original flame. So here we are now, going back in time, mapping the soul's journey, our spiritual journey, beyond hijacked teachings, beyond distorted religion and mutated gene codes. I also want to provide clarification on the meaning of true religion, Sphere of Amenti, and the return of the Emerald Order. Trace the soul's uninterrupted path, I should say, of ascension and genetic experimentation. I like to take the newcomers, or actually I want to introduce the newcomers to the frequency fence, and how that was the cause point for the fall of the human race. So this is a very broad description, and I would like to make this a 2-part series. Second one won't be too long, I promise. Get started with today's session. So I want to first say that the original flame, some of you might be asking, what is original flame? The original flame is not religion, nor is it beyond religion. It has nothing to do with religion. It was never a religion. It was a soul code, and it was a creed of unity, of respect and love. Because long before religion, before the systems of beliefs and the rules and the hierarchy and judgment, the original spiritual teachings were often linked to the original Templar lineage. You hear the word Templar often, and that's related to the chakras or related to the portals and stargates of the earth. That's the energy system that runs through the earth. It's the word for that is Templar. So when you hear Templar, that's what it's about. So the original spirit, the original religion was often linked to the Templar lineage. Teachings that did not divide people into 2 categories, godly and sinful, and anywhere in between. It didn't even promote masters and followers. Nobody had to grovel to a false god. Instead, they honored equality between genders, cultures and beings, and called for healing integration across society, across all cultures, across all civilizations. The original creed was that God, eternal energy, force, life force, was not a distant male figure who punished humans, but a living force within all creation that did not demand worship, but presence. Every soul, therefore, was a unique expression of that source. So the original creed embraced sacred energy mechanics and conscious embodiment of God force. It worked directly with God. There was no severing of that connection. It was all in reciprocation and exchange with God force. It was a perpetual regeneration of eternal life energy. It embraced sacred sexuality, devoid of all the lustful leanings that we see propagated today, even pushed in some agendas. It didn't exploit animals, it didn't exploit plants or minerals, it revered all life. It didn't teach good versus evil as a battle. It saw harmful actions as a result of one's ignorance, and it fell under the law of physics, under the law of cause and effect. And that ultimately was healed through wisdom and the law of one. Some tribes today still exist at that level of reconciliation and healing of shadow bodies. They integrate song and joy. Ceremonies are held for people who are going through dark periods in their life, depression, anxiety, mental disorders, and they were brought back to levels of frequency where they were able to feel the inner essence, at least, if not joy. And that was done through ceremony. So these distortions that we see now, they're rooted in misery programs. They're rooted in duality. They're rooted in the Armageddon software. They're rooted in duality, good versus bad, bad versus good. And they're rooted in greed, in elitism, in sexism, and in materialism. And what if I told you that these are not organic or natural for the human gene codes? They are not natural for the human gene codes. We are not born with misery, anxiety, depression. We are not born with these negative programs. These were seeded by off-planet forces like the Anunnaki resistance and their allies, who came here as visitors and posed as gods, as human gods, for the purpose of controlling the human evolution. These beings rewrote the original codes to keep humanity disempowered and disconnected from its true source. So the flame that we're talking about today is the emerald flame, because it extends and it is a creation from God's source directly, representing the light field. And it is the flame, the emerald flame. Once lit, it never dies. This is why the Emerald Order has returned. We don't say the Emerald Order is born, we say the Emerald Order has returned, because originally the Emerald Order was all that existed, was the only thing that existed before the distortions and the mutations took place. This is a lineage. It goes back, way, way back. And this is returning. The flame is returning and reawakening ancient codes. And though distortions led to our fall, the fall of the human race, and the loss of the DNA strands, and blocked connection to source, hope remains, because these strands are being restored through actually collective effort, through a collective conscious reclamation, through inner technologies like awakening the flame body, realigning with the monadic path, and many other activations. So what's happening essentially is a collective remembrance, even among those who are considered non-spiritual, which I don't like to use this word, but I can't think of another word right now. So the people that are not spiritually inclined, even them, they are awakening to an extent, because the planet is healing, the planet is beaming the energies that support the awakening, the reclamation, and the veil is lifting. When the veil is lifting, it has to uncover what is beneath it, and this is what's happening. So there is always hope through the heart and the higher heart when we remember and choose to reconnect with the eternal force. So that's basically in a nutshell what I will be taking you through today and the next episode. Today's segment largely references segments from the Voyages 1 and 2 body of work by Shayana Dean. I will break the concepts into simple sequential format for seekers. So I'll be mentioning the events in chronological order, in date order, to help you understand how it all unfolded from the timeline of ancient Egypt and Atlantis to taking you back to 11,600 years ago. A major portal in during the ancient Egyptian reign was the Great Pyramid, and it was a teleport station. Okay, this portal hosted interdimensional time travels from future Tara and past and future Earth. And there was a hybrid race called the Templar Anu who actually secretly worked for the Anunnaki resistance group. This this race, they felt they had to control the Great Pyramid teleportation station so that the resistance could have access to the Elysian spiral. Now, what's the Elysian spiral? This is the portal stargate through which the guardian races continued open visitation with the cultures of Earth, using the Elysian interdimensional spiral and the Great Pyramid teleportation station for easy access to Earth. That was fairly eventful, that period, because there were visitors, some invited, some were not invited, and occasionally intertime travelers from future Tara past future Earth. The reason they came is to share open commerce with human cultures, and sometimes showing their power and influence in various locations across the globe. So essentially, the resistance was not allowed to access the portal. So anyone who was Anunnaki or Draco or their allies, they were not permitted to access the portal. They were not authorized by the Syrian Council, who were the guardians of that particular portal. And so they were not permitted to access the one spiral for Earth visitation. Unauthorized groups knew they could, however, take the long way in using intergalactic portals which connected to the same portal system and others. So they found a way to infiltrate and come through using other pathways. It's worth mentioning that there's a program here called the Savior Programming that many who channel them other Pleiadians who became troublemakers and done a lot of damage energetically speaking. But the Pleiadians are a hybrid race of Samjazi, Elysian vril, reptile Pleiadians. So these particular race groups, they accessed the portal. They were the visitors, or I should say unauthorized visitors. They started working with intruder races and resistance. They didn't have good intentions. They were not here to heal. They were here to take over the grids. They were here for a strategic takeover. And so the Anunnaki resistance still occasionally infiltrated the Syrian Council security systems and secretly worked with the Templar Anu, primarily those in the Atlantean Islands. The Atlantean Islands, the Atlantean culture at the time digressed into a torturous, elitist society run by the Templar Anu operatives of the Anunnaki resistance, and this will change the course of Earth civilizations forever. Okay, what happened in Atlantis and what happened to Atlantis? The resistance, and now you know they're the Anunnaki and their allies, the Dracos, Pleiadians, they desired to, and they still do, by the way, that hasn't changed, they still desire to use humanity as a genetic experiment. They always wanted to create a worker race that would supply them with Earth resources. We know it's gold primarily, so other mineral compounds as well, but primarily gold. And they had good technology to do that. They used the Ankh tools the Ankh tools were pirated from the Melchizedeks of the inner Earth. So them and the Templar Anus attempted to, with that tool, to direct ultra-high frequency, fifth dimensional energy from the Ankhs through the great crystal generators, which at the time were fully operational in the Atlantean Islands, and through the Earth's energetic grid and into the Ark of the Covenant portal bridge. The Templar Anu, what they did was they did a grave mistake. They failed to properly seal the Sphere of Amenti. If you're not sure what this is, it is a sphere that's encoded in, it's encoded in codes to do with the race morphogenetic memory, which the human race, upon taking birth here, acquires at birth. So this becomes a DNA template from the Sphere of Amenti. You can say like it's the template, like the program, and that gets downloaded into the consciousness of humans born with certain genetics. So imagine how this would have helped in terms of remembering who we are, had that mission not failed, because the whole purpose of that was to evolve humanity's DNA, genetic codes. And the reason we have amnesia, we forget, is because we don't have the genetic software anymore. So we come here disconnected and we have to start from D1 all over again, and D2, and building those DNA blocks. So imagine that this seal was left open, which meant it could be penetrated, and eventually was, and distorted easily by any forces that knew about it. Because like everything else, frequency needs to be sealed so it's effective. Otherwise, it's easily corrupted in the wrong hands. So what happened was the Anunnaki resistance took hold of the blue flame staff of Amenti, which meant they could easily access the frequency code used by the Guardians to protectively seal the Sphere of Amenti against such attack, and the miscalculation became the downfall of Atlantis. So the Templar Anu, when they sent their destroyer beam, the electromagnetic pulses through the Ark of the Covenant, the electromagnetic pulse intercepted the Sphere of Amenti, with a security seal. The security seal would not allow the EM pulse, electromagnetic pulse, to travel into the Amenti sphere. Instead, it created a double overtone frequency on the DNA strands. A double overtone frequency on the DNA strands. It caused fission and an explosion of energies focused in the Andromeda galaxy. And these pulses quickly refracted off the security seal on the sphere. They replicated and intensified and then projected back through the Ark of the Covenant, disseminating through Earth's grids while remaining focused on their point of origin, which are the main crystal generators beneath the largest island of Atlantis. And that process occurred almost instantaneously. It was like that, millisecond, and it caused a chain of, like a domino chain reaction, with explosions all over and the destruction of most of the back then operational crystal generators. Now this event, people know as the fall of Atlantis, it took place in around 9,550 to 60 BC. More likely 9,560 BC. And, sadly, it led to, so it wasn't just the destruction of the grid that had to be rebuilt and reprogrammed, but it was also something extremely sad that took place, and that was the installation of something called frequency fence. So it's a frequency fence, it's a cap, or think of it as a wall, and that prevented further cataclysm from taking place. So it was essential for the Guardians to install the frequency fence, because had they not done that, there would have been a complete Earth wipeout. And every race, including every race, every culture and civilization that existed on Earth. This cataclysm is behind the Atlantis flood. Although part of Atlantis didn't flood, part of Atlantis went into a hibernation zone. It's another frequency plane of existence on another frequency band with that runs on a different angular rotation of particle spin. It's only accessed by people with certain genetic codes. And it still exists today, I believe. So, yeah, that's unfortunately what happened. And now, after the explosions beneath Atlantis, naturally they ceased. So the Syrian Council ordered the Syrian blue race to remove the crystal generators that did not explode. So they were taken out from the ocean floor and returned to Sirius B. And with the removal of the crystals, humanity's technological abilities were thrown into the Dark Ages. So that's the point at which we descended into the Dark Ages, and the once glorious civilizations of Earth now had to relearn history, went back to primitive methods of living, primitive organizations based on survival concerns and manual labor. So the technology was erased, the crystal generators, the advanced technology, everything was back to square one. And though the memory of the advanced societal structure remained, the application of these these methods that were once viable, they became impossible without the powers supplied through advanced ET technologies. So that's what we call the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages, just right after Atlantis. And okay, I'm going to delve into that Atlantean cataclysmic event because there's more details to it. So I'm just going to dive a little bit into that. Now you may ask, okay, why didn't the Syrian Council do anything to prevent that from taking place? Well, the answer to that is they discovered the plan a little too late, and they were unable to prevent this cataclysm from taking place. But what they did to help was they were able to rescue some groups of Syrian Council loyalists from the Atlantean Islands, and they were taken into via these interdimensional crafts to Egypt. Okay, so they were taken from Atlantis to Egypt. There were fleets that rapidly scattered all over the earth in a few hours prior to the explosions, warning the cultures to retreat undergrounds and into Earth civilization. So there was a warning. It was a little bit late. Didn't give people much time to prepare, let alone energetically, align to gates that they could, ultimately travel through to find shelter and refuge from the deluge that would soon follow. So many people from many lands tried to pour into the inner earth portals, and yet sadly some could not enter before the portals closed, and so these people perished. And the portals and the underground passageways leading to them were also sealed, closed from inside using the Ankh tools. So yeah, that was really sad. So the first series of explosions actually that took place blew apart the land mass of the largest Atlantean island, because there was a number of them. I don't know how many, but there was one large and there was many other islands scattered around. but the largest one had received the biggest pulses, and the pulses that took place generated tectonic shifting under the ocean floor, and that's usually why we have tsunamis, okay? But in that case, because they were charged with energy, they set off a series of explosions with the crystal generators, decimating land mass of the two remaining islands, sending them deep into the caverns beneath the ocean floor. So they literally sunk underground. And that's when Atlantis was removed from the face of the earth. Not all islands had the same fate. Okay, some others, like I said, they went into a different frequency band. Explosions took place in around 9560 or 5860 BC. And what had happened following that is an earth shift, earth axis shift, which means some of the global land masses were moving, and land was moving, massive earthquakes, massive floodings all over. And although these weren't like as intense as previous floods, but they were still pretty intense. And the Giza teleport station was again thrown out of alignment as the Earth's vortex beneath it. As you know, Giza is the heart chakra of Earth, but that no longer energetically lined up properly with the Elysian spiral, which means people could not exit and could not come through because it wasn't aligned. And for a Stargate, it has to be aligned. The portal has to be aligned with the destination. You know, it all links together. So if it's a misalignment, then no one could come through. Well, there's other ways to sort of work around it, but it wasn't the right way to do it. So yeah, that's essentially what happened. Now, delving into something called the rod and staff. This is important to understand the mechanics of what had happened energetically. The rod and staff are stored into something called the Ark of the Covenant. They were created tools charged with fifth-dimensional energies. And they were meant to bring the fifth-dimensional energy back to Earth, okay? Because that's something we had before on Terra. And since the fall on Earth, the fifth-dimensional energies, you can say, were no longer accessible. So the rod and staff had been charged with the fifth-dimensional energies. They're objects that enabled humans to access portals of inner Earth to facilitate healing and DNA bio-regensis. Okay, so now we have the rod, the staff, and the ankh, and they were all placed in the protection of a race that lived in inner Earth called the Melchizedeks. And by the way, they were later banned from being used on surface level Earth and deactivated. Okay, I'll explain that in a bit. So the chest box in which the charged rod and staff were stored in was called the Ark of the Covenant. The purpose of the seal placed on the Ark of the Covenant was to keep the Sphere of Amenti in place within the Andromeda planetary core, which would not be restored to Earth until Earth has vibrated high enough to hold the frequencies within it. Because if you attempt to send a pulse to something that's not congruent energetically, it's going to explode, it's going to split, it's going to implode. You know, many things happen. So it has to be at a reasonably enough energy, holding capacity so the frequencies can run through it and it can integrate it. Now, if the sphere arrived early, when the Earth frequency was not ready for it, it would explode and Earth would be reduced to dust. So a plan had to be devised by the Syrian councils Elohim, Ra Confederacy, Paladorian Council, and other Earth Guardian groups. They were the Earth Guardian groups. Guardians means they protected the Templar. The plan was put into effect around 9540 BC. And so the Elohim were commissioned to alter the Earth's D2, this is emotional body, the D2 level, morphogenetic field, in a way that would create a nice, subtle, natural frequency fence or energetic barrier surrounding the Earth through which the Sphere of Amenti would be unable to pass. So that's to prevent creating further cataclysm. That's why the frequency fence was installed. So what happened from the frequency fence is the 7th to 12th frequency base tones and 7 to 12 base tones and 7 to 9 overtones of our DNA of the third dimensional frequency bands, just the third dimensional frequency bands, because you have third dimensional, fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional. Within those are 12 sub-frequency bands. So that's what happened. 7 to 12 base tones and 7 to 9 overtones of the third dimensional frequency bands were removed from Earth's morphogenetic pattern. So if the Sphere of Amenti arrived during a time when Earth's populations were not ready energetically, what happened is that the sphere would remain in the astral until the Earth's three-dimensional frequencies were re-entered and integrated, when people had a level of frequency vibration to integrate the energies. That was necessary at the time, but what had happened is, obviously, it stunted the planet's ability to evolve naturally out of density 1. So frequency bands, dimensions 1, 2, and 3. So we were stuck on the third dimension for a long time to come. Okay. Now, 10th to 11th overtones of the third dimension were actually left within the Earth's morphogenetic field, which meant that a portion of Earth's particles would manifest within the 11th and 12th frequency band of the third dimension. Okay, what this meant is because those higher strands of the subfrequency dimension 3, the subfrequency band were actually left. So the 10th to 12th were left, which meant that a creation of something like a version of Earth on the 10th to 12th frequency band. This was called Earth Phantom. So that Earth Phantom came online. So it's like you have a future timeline of Earth awaiting to be physical, to manifest. You have the energy imprint of it, but not the physical manifestation of it yet. Certain people who were able to activate the DNA and via letter codes could tap into that energy imprint, but that wasn't for a very long time to come, because everyone on the planet, including Earth, was phase locked into dimension 3 for a while. But certain people who had the ability, that could be more advanced, more evolved souls that came here to help, possibly only a very few of them, they were able to remove seals of Palador and Templar seals and all the other seals and access that, at least Phantom Earth. Okay. With that Phantom Earth being created, it meant that in the dimensional blending period of around 6,800 BC, the Sphere of Amenti could be entered into the 10th and 11th overtone of D3. So Sphere of Amenti was put on into Phantom Earth. And so when people died, their soul fragments were no longer trapped in D4 astral, the beginning of the astral frequency band. they were able to move into the phantom earth, essentially that meant that the Sphere of Amenti could release the trapped souls, and it was a huge evolution in terms of human consciousness. Otherwise, if that didn't happen, we would probably still be trapped in that frequency fence. Okay. Now, what happened also, and this is the part where I'm going to take you into higher self and ego and how ego was created. So ego is not a natural part of our anatomy. We're not born with an ego. We perceive that as such because now we are all 100% of people have egos. They come here with the ego, right? But ego is not natural, just as the vagus nerve is not a natural part of our anatomy. Because of all these mutations, it was created to substitute for what wasn't there, okay, or to bridge the gap between worlds, if you like. So the higher self and the ego came into being within the human lineage around the time of Atlantis, in around 9540 BC, manifested as a result of that frequency fence that was created to stop the Sphere of Amenti from destroying Earth by entering the Earth's core early. And how it happened is, as I've mentioned before, the seal was placed, and the frequency fence was installed, and to protect the Earth from exploding and returning to space dust. This was advantageous on one hand, but due to the implementation of the frequency fence, Earth had to naturally evolve under a quarantine, and humanity was cut off from the interstellar heritage. The Guardians had to adopt a policy of non-interference with earthly affairs, but continued to hold the frequency fence in place to preserve the integrity of the planet. It was decided that humans would be allowed to orchestrate their own affairs on Earth, with the Guardians only attending to issues that were absolutely essential, okay, like to do with the evolutionary ascension. So in the beginning, the fortification of the frequency fence was intended for security purposes, but later it was an opportunity for the Elohim to extend favoritism to those humans carrying certain genetic strains more closely matching theirs. They gave unfair treatment in terms of evolution, and that's called an advantage. And to the races that they gave preferential treatment to were the Ceres Egyptians, the Hebrew cloisters, because these two had connections to Elohim more than other races. The overall effect of the frequency fence and the security tactics to enforce it was the physical Earth and its people were all locked into galactic quarantine, losing their position multidimensionally and intergalactically with other communities. And because of this quarantine, information that traveled down through the frequency fence of high dimension would no longer reach the human race. Okay. And therefore, memory also became affected, because if there's no information coming through, no transmissions, memory is not really able to regenerate. No one, not only would the race memory suffer, but interdimensional communications from higher dimensional fields would also be curtailed, and the higher frequency transmissions could not pass through the frequency fence. Now, what it meant on a personal level in our bodies was that the energetic position or chakra between third solar plexus mental body and fourth astral body meant there was a gap created there between the conscious mental awareness and the astral level of awareness. So what that meant is during dream states, there would be a gap between the waking identity and the astral experience. Like we are today, we have the waking state is different to very different. And we're very alienated at times from the astral experience. We have no clue why we dream such dreams. There was a gap because the DNA codes, the messages, they didn't make sense. The codes were being misinterpreted and there was a misfiring of the DNA. And that gap, because of the 7 to 12 base tones and 7 to 9 overtones mutation, that's what created the dream distortion in dream recall, in which the consciousness would encounter the missing tones and be unable to translate sensory information from frequency bands corresponding to these tones and genetic codes. Prior to that, prior to the frequency fence, memory with other dimensional experiences during the dream state was far more lucid. Wasn't as dissociated from the body, and during sleep it would be stored in a form of electric impulse within the consciousness of the person. And when the consciousness returned to the body, these electrical impulses would be translated through the body into like something tangible, something coherent that made sense and sequential. So you could see, how you go from A to B to C, it had a sequence. Not like now when we dream, it's all over the place and it's really hard to make sense of the chronological order of the events. So the electrical impulses within the consciousness, within which the imprint of high dimensional experiences was stored, could not pass through the gap between third and fourth chakras, so the experiential memory could not be translated into conscious sequential dream recall. And that's we wonder why a lot of souls born here now come with genetic mutations. A lot of souls born here still hold these mutations. And they weren't only distorted, but they were also cut off from higher strand 7 to 12 base and overtones 7 to 9. And so that's a big portion of DNA strands. That's huge. You only need a half a strand to create a mess. So imagine 7 to 12. That's pretty much all of our higher strands, the base tones. So once a soul essence entered into a planetary morphogenetic field, this is how the fetal integration process occurred, is the fetus would adopt that pattern that's coming from the earth, the planet, what they bring forward and what they bring through, and also the parent and the racial memory and all of it. And that came through the shields. So the baby would be born with all memory intact, 100% remembered, and they're born and they know where they're going, what their purpose is, and what they're here to do. And it was a joyful experience before the mutation. But now once a soul came through the planetary morphogenetic field and went into fetal integration, there was a massive loss of consciousness, like 95% or more loss of consciousness. And so after the frequency fence and the third dimensional tones were removed from the planetary morphogenetic field, the soul that was passing through to be born on Earth could not take and adopt the full imprint of the third DNA strand, as the missing third dimensional tones would not allow the other codes from the soul morphogenetic field to plug into the Earth's morphogenetic field. So the DNA is created in physical terms as it's already existing morphogenetic field imprint passes through the earth, and then it's picked up, and then it will flesh out, and it will become matter. If certain frequencies and bass tones and overtones are missing from the earth core, these frequencies carried in the DNA imprint could not become materialized. And so the DNA would manifest without these tones in the operational strands, which means it'll come about as a physical mutation, and it will show in the body, the memory, and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's the frequency fence. I covered the rod and stuff. And now moving forward in time, fast forward 4,000 years. So, okay, I'll just go one step back. So descending into the Dark Ages, I guess you can, you can infer what life would have been in Dark Ages. Dark Ages, dark, okay? No technology, no resources. Everybody is scurrying around trying to get the next meal because there wasn't enough food, and security was a real concern, and people lived primitively back then, okay, in the Dark Ages. Now that doesn't stay the same. Obviously things pick up and people evolve, and then the technology comes down again, comes through. And so moving fast forward 4,000 years, and we arrive at timeline around 5,500 or 5,400 BC, where the remains of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx had to be rebuilt or reconstructed. And so the reconstruction took place by a group or a race called the Syrian Egyptians, and also the cloister Melchizedeks. So the cloister Melchizedeks with the Syrian Egyptians, they were directed by the priesthood of which live in inner earth, to reconstruct the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. And so, yes, they used manual labor, and the Great Pyramid was restored. And I'm not sure how long it took, but maybe like, I don't know how many years. But it became a religious center through which the Ark of the Covenant was fortified and secured. And all that was done, but it no longer served as an interstellar teleport. Why? Because now we have a pole shift, a Earth axis tilt, or a pole tilt from the Atlantean cataclysm, and because of the frequency fence in 9,540 BC. And so the Sphinx was reconstructed, and the contours of the structure's facial features were altered to more resemble that of the Syrian Egyptians, and there were strong features, the Syrian Egyptians. But the features that were more in line with the Anunnaki facial features, they were omitted. They were taken out because they originally designed the structure in 40,000 years before that. So around 46,000 BC. The leonine body shape, it remained as a tribute to the remembered gods of Egyptian mythology, who represented the symbolic trace memories of the ancient Anunnaki affiliations in the harmonic universe to leonine races. So these races reconstructed the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Sphinx, and so the Syrian Egyptians and the Melchizedek cloister families. And from there on, they continued covert contact, okay, because they had to be discreet to stay in touch with the priest of okay, because they didn't want another cataclysm and resistance races that would intercept the line. So they had to be very careful, and they remained in connection with the priests of They were entrusted with the rod and staff. We fast forward again in 1324 BC. Okay, that's like 3,000 years ago. Okay. The Melchizedek cloister, the keepers of the blue flame, came through Egypt and became scattered. They had to hide. They had to be discreet and hide because they were considered criminals of the state because they revered Akhenaten, who was the pharaoh and who was helping ascend people, mainly the Anus, through the Sphere of Amenti. So the pharaoh Akhenaten helped the Anus to ascend through the Sphere of Amenti, and so the Melchizedek cloister, the holders of the blue flame, had to hide because they were being targeted. Many events happened, big jumble of events actually, and the priests of from inner earth, they become involved. They were heavily involved. They tried to teach Akhenaten, the pharaoh, and other priests of ancient Egypt the path to ascension, the true path of ascension beyond hijacked teachings and beyond religion. But the problem is most of the priests defected, okay, and tried to annihilate each other. Akhenaten meant well, and he tried to do the right thing, and he did. But also he became stuck in D2. He became stuck in the emotional body in grief for his assassinated son. So he was in grief and he started to do things out of line, sometimes irresponsibly. So due to that, it led to another division of the Sphere of Amenti. This time it was divided in half, split in half. And although Akhenaten was ultimately successful in entering the Anu people into the Sphere of Amenti and orchestrating the ascension of many individuals and many races during his brief reign, he left a detracting legacy of chaos behind him. He left a mess that needed to be fixed. And so the halls of Amenti again had to be shut down. The Sphere of Amenti was broken into two, part of the race morphogenetic field in chaos within D2, Earth core, and the other quarantined in ultra-high frequency bands on the third dimension. So it was split into half on D2, half on D3. And the Ark of the Covenant had to be sealed again. And the frequency fence, it's back again. And it had to be put back in place to prevent the Sphere of Amenti from descending through the Ark. So it had to be put back. And yeah, that's the unfortunate thing. And that's in more recent times, 3,000 years ago. That's recent. So following that, in 1331 BC, following the death of Tutankhamun, the Elohim and the priests of disheartened, of course, they transferred the guardianship of the Ark of the Covenant out of Egyptian hands. The Ark of the Covenant was now placed in the protection of the Hebrew cloister races, under the supervision of the blue flame Melchizedeks. But they were deactivated, so the rod and staff were deactivated, and thus the entry into the inner earth portals were also taken away from many races who dwelled on surface level. Dispute then took place, and in regards to what should be done with the program of human evolution within the ranks of the Elohim that reside on harmonic universe 3, so that's frequency bands 7 to 9, the Syrian Council, harmonic universe 2 races, which are frequency bands 4 to 6, and the Ra Confederacy from the metagalactic core. So these are the original guardians. The dispute amongst them occurred as to what should be done with the evolution program of humanity moving forward. And we can see now in contemporary history, politics, duality, conflict, wars, it's all to do with the mutations that were put here to protect Earth from exploding and going into space dust. But in that period, around 1300 BC, the chosen people false notion was born, as well as the propagation of the false Templar creed, or what we know now as the New Age false religion. Just an unfortunate sequence of events took place. For example, Elohim and the Syrian councils began showing favoritism for two groups, the Hebrew people, and the Melchizedeks. These groups, by the way, you can see remnants or some of their teachings primarily connected to the Kabbalah and the Thothian schools of thought. They began seeing themselves as the chosen ones, or the special groups, special race, and purposely began influencing evolving cultures to adopt their Templar creed. But that's not the original creed, the original flame. That's the distorted teachings that we see alive today, the New Age religion. Okay, they promoted, for instance, male dominance within the races. Another thing that was rampant as well is interbreeding. So they had to control that by controlling women breeders and forcing interracial discrimination practices so that they could keep the line pure. And this is the method, one of the methods they adopted to keep the Elohim preferred lineage of the Hebrew races and Melchizedeks pure of distortion. These selected chosen ones would be given special privileges of ascension if they followed the teachings of the Elohim's altered Templar creed. It's not the original flame. It's not the original flame teachings. It's the altered Templar creed. So the Elohim had basically given up on the rest of the human population and actually made no attempt to assist the general population in healing the damage that was done to their genetic codes through the propagation of the Templar Axion seal. Okay. Now, many years later, we're still trying to remove those seals. You know, you got the Jehovah's seals, Zeta seals, Axion seals, so many, and Templar cross, and Solar cross, and many other seals. And we're still attempting to remove those mutations in our genetic codes. Other members of the Elohim, the Pleiadian Star League Council, the Andromeda and the Arcturian Federation, felt this preferential treatment was unfair, and they appealed to the Ra Confederacy for intervention. Okay, so the Ra Confederacy were intergalactic core, and they were considered the highest, and they appealed to them. And they agreed that the treatment was biased and detrimental to human evolution. And so in 700 BC, the Azorite family of the Ra Confederacy was called into operation as primary protectors of the covenant of Palador. And the Azorites were sent here. Their primary concern was to realign the morphogenetic field of the Sphere of Amenti, reintegrate all races who had been removed, and prepare races for the next level or the next opening of the halls of Amenti. If you don't know what the halls of Amenti are, I'm just going to give you a brief explanation. Halls of Amenti are a set of stargates or portal passages that link with Earth's core Merkaba field through inner Earth and parallel Earth. The halls of Amenti stargate access codes were protected by Earth and inner Earth guardians, usually and mostly the Ur priests. Okay, now the next round of opening of the halls of Amenti was scheduled for 2000 to 2017. Okay, yes, 9 years ago, that was the end cycle of the opening of the stargates. Okay, they last 17 years. They were open for 17 years. And the Azurites and Elohim worked together through the Melchizedek cloister to bring those undistorted, so original Templar teachings, which we know now as the Freedom Teachings or the Law of One, the CDT plate translations, the Keylontic Science. That's all part of the original Templar teachings of the Law of One. So that all came back into manifestation on Earth. It was brought back in 1998 by Ashiana Dean, who represented the Melchizedek order cloister, and she was speaker 1, okay, and Michael Dean speaker 2. So, and there's a third speaker, Marianne Calloway. So the trio were the 3 speakers assigned by the Melchizedek cloister order to bring the original Templar teachings back. Okay. Now, the third seeding, I must mention, is we are in the third seeding now. And what it is, it's a mission. It's a mission of restoration of human DNA, following 2 past extinctions of the human race. The planet guardians beings helped with the first and the second seedings, tried to prepare humanity for the opening of the halls of Amenti and a mass ascension between 196 and 4230 AD. So 196 BC and 4230 AD. This wasn't going to be easy, as the Templar Anu races and their allies had a stronghold on human cultures on Earth, and they created a lot of resistance to any form of evolution that was going to take place. Okay, the Azurite Council knew that in order for the races to prepare for this mass ascension wave of 2017 AD, the integrity of the Sphere of Amenti must be restored by realigning portions of the sphere trapped within the second dimensional Earth morphogenetic field. So the Elysion morphogenetic fields of Templar Melchizedek's and those that received the Templar Axion seals during Akhenaten's reign were stored in Sirius B, also need to be reintegrated into the Sphere of Amenti. This time not only would the races be restored to their place within Amenti, but the entire Sphere of Amenti would be realigned with the original 12-strand DNA pattern. So now we can speak of 12-strand DNA, because now the 12-strand DNA pattern is available. And that mutation is mostly lifted, and now we can enjoy the process of the realignment and the integration, or reintegration, I should say, of our 12-dimensional frequencies all the way up to our avatar level. And speaking of avatar, in the period coming to, 20 AD, 20 BC, okay, there was a plan to send an avatar from Terra, okay, a pure Taranesian from Tara. His name was Jeshua Melchizedek, one of the blue flame holders. Okay, I think I will stop at this point here. The next segment, I'll be continuing on offering contemporary view on the human race and the evolution and the events that followed from the birth of the in 12 BC of the 12 level avatar pure Taranesian soul. So the journey continues, the following segment, right from this point where we left off. Be well and walk gently with the flame, and I'll see you after a very short break. I promise it won't be long this time. So stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Only love.